Hey everybody, this isn't the video that I had been hoping to release at this time, but I just had to dig through some stuff and get this off my chest. I often find myself exhausted or perturbed by discussions that I don't think are very mindful or constructive, and this, I guess you'd call it discourse, is really the worst of the bunch right now. We're going to be looking at some videos repping the get woke, go broke phenomenon, and while these videos treat it as a fact, I'd like to offer my critique as something of a debunking of this sentiment, in addition to examining the incidental arguments of these videos. As a quick disclaimer, I look at 4 different videos here, and it wouldn't really be fair to my audience to just keep all that footage in the video. I don't want this video to be like a couple hours long. I think before we go forward with this, it's important to define what get woke, go broke means. I first heard this around the time that the 7th Star Wars film, The Force Awakens, came out. I think it's been true, at least from then until now, that get woke, go broke roughly means that when a corporation or creator expresses woke sentiment, usually meaning like progressive views, they drive people away from their work and become unsuccessful, financially speaking at least. As a beginning thesis to this video, I'd just like to point out that there are so many exceptions to this idea that a creator or corporations having certain political views would result in them losing finances that I don't buy this as a rule. We'll be talking about whether it's happening, but we can't go in thinking that this is an absolute rule. Samantha Bee, Trevor Noah, and let's face it, almost every Daily Show correspondent are now great examples of a faux woke personality who isn't really awfully progressive, but ironically makes their name off of progressivism. But what about so-called apolitical media? J.K. Rowling lived off the goodwill of progressive fans of the Harry Potter series for years. On the other side of the spectrum, Tim Allen is a rare conservative who has had a very successful comedy career. So even being unwoke doesn't necessarily mean you'll go broke, as the term goes. All of these people incorporate their personal political views into their work, even if they aren't necessarily being preachy. But with that out of the way, I want to look at our first video. This is Mr. H Review's video about a tweet by the makers of Fate of Cthulhu, which is, I believe, an RPG in the same vein as Call of Cthulhu, although I don't know much about the distinctions between the two. I am familiar with Lovecraft, however, so this is not unknown territory for me.
Right, welcome to the channel, ladies and gentlemen. We're going to be talking about Lovecraft. We're going to be talking about Evil Hat Productions' brand new Cthulhu RPG, and how ultimately it's going to be a failure. And I say that for many, many reasons, mainly because of these tweets. Now, this statement here is basically it's just the absolute prime example of get woke, go broke. And I think it shows a fundamental lack of understanding behind the work of Lovecraft, but also a fundamental lack of understanding of not only the era that Lovecraft lived in, and also the fundamental lack of understanding of those that like Lovecraft's work. So let's take a look. What are we talking about? We're talking about Lovecraft being a racist, which he was. But when we look at the history of the world around the time that Lovecraft lived in, literally near enough everyone was racist. While developing Fate of Cthulhu, we were obligated to reflect on the problematic roots of the source material. So, let me get this straight, Evil Hat Productions. You like Lovecraft's work so much that you are going to profit from it, because it's in the public domain, right? Yet you are going to distinguish and differentiate yourself from it whilst profiting off of it because you want to be woke and you're afraid of being associated with it. So we tackle that on page 6. The mythos is definitely worth exploring and profiting from, but it's also worth re-examining. But you're profiting from it, you hypocrite.
This is an abridged version of Mr. H's video, which I hope represents his views well enough. He opens with this idea that H.P. Lovecraft was indeed racist, but that being racist wasn't uncommon at the time. There is truth to the idea that certain public sentiments have developed over time, but with the establishment of mass media that has created a larger culture accessible to people across many nations, I don't think he's really representing H.P. Lovecraft's racism fairly. Lovecraft did, for example, infamously have a cat that he, and I'm paraphrasing here, named Mr. N-word. We are talking about a time where race relations were different than they are now, but the N-word has never been a nice thing to say about anybody. Also, as an addendum, and I only sort of looked into this after I was writing this script, so I'm just inserting this here and now off the top of my head, but I found there are a lot of correspondences between Lovecraft and other people of his era that were preserved, people that he knew, and apparently they thought that he was too racist as well. So this idea that Lovecraft's racism was normal in any capacity, I think, is just false. So does that prove that Lovecraft is some special kind of racist? Probably, but most people also probably didn't name their cats the N-word just because the cat was black. Lovecraft's racism wasn't just a personal view. His work tends to stoke fear of what's sometimes known as the other in a way that one can very easily imagine maps onto his racist views. And this is what that tweet is seemingly about. Lovecraft wasn't just racist in his private life, it's his work that contains some interesting implications. And when you take work that has been racially insensitive, even implicitly insensitive to ideas of diversity in it, it's pretty anodyne to say that the work is problematic and that you're going to be representing the source material as well as possible without reproducing or encouraging the racism. So when you phrase it like that, Mr. H's response starts to seem more and more ridiculous. Yes, of course, the creators of the Cthulhu RPG would want to be as true to this beloved work as possible, but maybe cut some of the racist bits. Mr. H seems quite upset that these developers are profiting off of Lovecraft's work, and we'll get to that later on a little bit more when we talk about another one of these videos, but for now I'd like to talk about the fact that they're also editing the content and how he calls this hypocritical, because he thinks it's hypocritical to profit from work that's in the public domain while also condemning the racist components of the work in the public domain. This is profoundly nonsensical, and while I want to avoid reading into Mr. H's views too much, I think what we're seeing here is a deep reluctance to examine, or as the tweet says, re-examine, the nature of something we're using to create something else. Do you think it would be hypocritical to create art that references the Bible while maybe leaving out the parts about disciplining your wife? I don't know. When you even try to look at all of this, I think you'll find that there's simply an attempt to resist criticism. If you don't like the criticism of Lovecraft as being racist, or even inextricably racist, so much so that you're willing to defend those views as being common, even if they weren't necessarily that common, I think we can start to understand why you're so reticent to allow anyone to admit that they might not want to reproduce the worst aspects of Lovecraft.
Now he continues, right? This is all in their book, which don't buy it. And there's a great comment on here about it being digital. So if you do want it, and it says, go ahead, we'll wait. Bit of British humour there, I'm sure, because we're the experts of dry sarcasm. Now that we've gotten that issue out in the open, let us turn our attention to why we still find the Cthulhu mythos, of which he planted the seed, a fruitful garden in which to find stories. Because you're profiting off of its popularity. It is as transparent as a fucking window.
Now, I'd like to really thank Mr. H here for implying that all of his criticism of profit motive has been a massive projection. He mentioned earlier that he likes Lovecraft, but when the creators express genuine love for Lovecraft's work, he condescends to them about making a profit. But why should that matter? Does Mr. H profit from his videos? Is he a cynical grifter because he's using the love other people might have for Lovecraft's work to attack these creators and to stir up a counter-narrative to the political reading of Lovecraft put forward by these creators? If you don't believe that, then what Mr. H is saying shouldn't make sense to you either. A creator profiting from a work doesn't or shouldn't reduce their reverence for it, regardless of how they interpret it. I'm not going to accuse Mr. H of being like a fake Lovecraft fan or something, but he does seem to be implying that at least something similar is true of the fate of Cthulhu developers. So now we're reaching the broke part of Get Woke, Go Broke, and I have to say that I'm a little disappointed in Mr. H, because when he started this video, I was told this was about getting woke and going broke, but all I see now is getting woke and the threat of going broke, which doesn't really prove anything. It's a little bit funny to me that Mr. H thinks he's going to get the word out about this RPG to the extent that it will be boycotted by a significant number of people, such that it will hurt the finance of the developers. Evil Hat Productions was trying to raise money and get backers to fund this endeavor. So what Mr. H is suggesting, if what Mr. H is suggesting works, then it's a bit of a scumbag move, in my opinion, to intentionally try to hamstring a Kickstarter-style operations just because you didn't like that they took out the racism and such.
And it continues, right? Because again, it's got to continue. It has to. Why could it not continue? Since the predictable, you posted it to gain traction, mate. But I'm going to gain you some traction now. Above and beyond what you had got. Way above and beyond your 807 retweets and your 2.k likes. Oh, I'm telling you now, there's going to be a lot of people that will be thoroughly interested in, well, not interested in your RPG, but interested in boycotting it. But I personally think they're scum. I personally think if anyone is going to sit there and you're literally going to write, I mean, this is just ridiculous. This is utterly ridiculous. It's fairly obvious, right? Anyone with half a brain cell knows this.
Now, I myself am not always on the ball with my sentence structure and phrasing when I'm recording in one take off the cuff, but Mr. H here says that the creators are scum. And then as he begins to elaborate, he falls into just saying that what's going on is ridiculous such that it's obvious, seemingly too obvious to bother explaining why it would be so scummy for the creators of Fate of Cthulhu to have a differing interpretation of the politics of Lovecraft from his. Anyway, in an effort to find a more coherent argument about getting woke and going broke, we're going to return to the kind of example I hope will more represent some of the older arguments I mentioned about Star Wars 7, this time moving up to in the saga to Star Wars 9, which I thought was about as good as 7 in that they both seemed a little on the blander side, but if I'm giving my Star Wars opinions, we'll be here all day.
Star Wars The Rise of Skywalker is now just 2 weeks away from its official release by Disney, Lucasfilm, J.J. Abrams, and even creator George Lucas. We also know that Disney and Lucasfilm went through many different changes and adjustments throughout the months of August, September, and October to really change the overall tone of this movie, and it really seems to have been done in a way that's not going to sit well with a lot of fans out there, that caters to identity politics and everything else related to Disney's agenda that goes past storytelling. Along with these changes, it led to the cancellation of many scenes. For those acts to have more scenes that would involve identity politics and to focus more on diversity. It said that one of the major scenes that were deleted from the film had to do with Luke Skywalker actually appearing in front of Palpatine and Palpatine's throne room, where Luke would use a power from the Journal of the Wills, where Luke would be able to materialize himself as coming back to life temporarily to fight Palpatine and to help Kylo and Rey in the throne room battle. Now, this sequence was said to have been deleted to focus more on another scene with the Resistance and identity politics, with Disney exploring real-world events and real-world politics in the film, where it's explained that this all has to do with the Resistance fighting on top of a Star Destroyer, and that particular scene contains real-world conflicts that will be sent out as a message by Disney in the movie.
Wait, so I genuinely hadn't written this part of the video before watching these examples in full? And I swear I didn't cherry-pick this one. This is an actual thing that I just stumbled onto and figured it would maybe be a good example of what we're looking into. Are we seriously supposed to believe that Mike knows what the response is going to be to a film before it's even released? Come to think of it, this is just like Mr. H's response to Fate of Cthulhu, in that neither of these YouTubers know the thing that they're mocking is going to be a financial failure. They're just saying it will, presumably because they don't like the politics of the creators. And what is the political agenda of Disney? I don't think they have much of a political agenda beyond protecting their profits. So it really makes you wonder at our conceit to think that a handful of us YouTuber buffoons would know more about Disney's profit analytics than Disney and would care more about the direction of Disney's finances than Disney. This might be a spoiler if you haven't seen it, but Star Wars The Rise of Skywalker didn't actually cater to identity politics. I'm just going to come out and say that. It's impossible for me to conclusively prove a negative, but I'm nostalgic already for Mr. H's video. Maybe I was too hard on Mr. H, because his video was way better than this one. He actually reads from the tweets on screen. What is Mike reading from? Where is he getting this leaked insight that Disney was shoehorning identity politics into their film? This is very conspiratorial writing that frames Disney in a negative light, so it would be odd for them to have published it. Mike is speaking as if he's reading citations to us, and he's clearly reading from a script, but what this actually feels like is a cobbled together conjecture with a clear insertion of details that Mike couldn't have known at the time. What is he basing this idea that Disney is canceling scenes to appeal to identity politics on? Did some screenwriter or director come forward and say, oh yeah, we're actually going to be doing identity politics in our movie, which is why we're taking away a bunch of the stuff, because also all we care about is being woke as a corporation? Mike is raving in a really disconcerted way, and I'm not sure that I approve of all of these unfounded assertions. Everything Mike says about the scene on the Star Destroyer being about identity politics is weird and wrong. That's not remotely what happened in this scene. All the characters didn't suddenly stop and look into the camera and say, wow, Donald Trump is a really bad president, and I wish Hillary Clinton had won because she was a woman. Every sentence that tumbles out of Mike's mouth is more insane than the last, but he only ever says that these things are being said. He never sources these claims to anyone credible or associated with the film.
Now, this decision was said to have been done by J.J. Abrams and applies to what J.J. stated a couple of days ago, that the film will address and support the LGBTQ community. One of the other scenes in the current version of the film, in the very beginning of the film, is that it's actually said to be a scene based within the ship of the 10T4, where also it taps into identity politics and Disney's agenda that are promoting in the film quite directly to the audience to reach out to a general public.
Here we get more about Disney's secret agenda. This is increasingly deranged as Mike's video goes on, but one good thing he does here is quote J.J. Abrams as saying that there will be some support for the LGBT community in the film. I saw this movie, and to be clear, I would have loved this if it was true, but if it was, then I must have blinked and missed it because literally nothing important to the queer community was in this film. I watched the scene back, and sure enough, I had totally missed that there was a quick kiss between two women while some rebels were celebrating. I honestly cannot take seriously anyone who speaks of this as if there's some agenda, when clearly this was a small moment played up by a director who refused to make two of the main characters gay despite the input from the actors themselves that it would feel more natural. If you saw that Oscar Isaac interview, you know what I'm talking about. Also, as a nitpick, it's pronounced Tantive, not Tantive. This is a classic ship which Princess Leia is on at the beginning of the first original Star Wars film. You know, the consular ship on a diplomatic mission? Come on, man.
And it seems like Hollywood just doesn't learn from their mistakes at all, and they just don't care about the box office results. They just want to keep pushing their agenda as far as they can to where it reaches as many people as they can.
This is just really, really sad. My man can't get through a sentence without contradicting himself. So what? Disney has a secret gay agenda and they want their message to reach as many as possible, but they also don't care about the box office? Do you not see the contradiction in saying that they want as many people to see it, but they don't care how many tickets get sold? This is so weird. It's like a complete inversion of reality to say that Disney is putting a woke agenda above corporate agenda, when the opposite is so often true. Disney is incredibly averse to having openly gay main characters, to the point that they keep trying to throw queer people crumbs of representation, like LeFou from Beauty and the Beast in the live adaptation, or these little background kisses, or by saying Lando is bisexual but not putting it in the movie Solo. When you take a step back, it becomes so obvious that these examples mean the opposite of what Mike is saying, and I really pity the guy because he's so redundantly asserting something that is internally contradictory and self-evidently false. I'm really hoping our next video has better insight into how not to get woke and go broke. This is actually an interview with James Delingpole, and I'm quite pleased to take a quick break from the typical YouTube response video format.
You've been a strong critic of the BBC, and particularly for its cultural output, which David was raising.
Yeah.
I mean, what's your take on all of this?
Well, can I just pick David up on that, the climate change point? For some considerable time now, the BBC has refused to give airspace to so-called climate deniers, i.e. people who are sceptical about the quality of the science, suggesting that we're all going to hell in a handcart because of this thing called man-made global warming.
Okay, I'm going to skip the weird pro-fossil fuel industry and climate change denial talking points in this interview because It's honestly pretty disgusting to see someone try to marry their anti-woke attitude to an anti-science attitude, which maybe some of the other folks discussed in this video would disagree strongly with, because they aren't Weasley corporate stooges. I also don't want to derail this video's topic by getting into an evidence-based discussion of climate change, because, again, we would be here for a very long time.
Yes, I think the bigger problem with the BBC is to do with things that aren't to do with current affairs. The fact that you cannot watch, for example, a BBC drama now without seeing this tick box United Colours of Benetton casting, for example. There was what was the one about The Bodyguard, where the sniper teams had black female snipers. Now, you show me a black female sniper anywhere in London, I'll be very impressed. You notice these things. Doctor Who is now so impossibly woke that it's gone broke, basically.
First of all, I'd like to fact-check the assertion that Doctor Who has gotten so woke that it's broke, because the first reality of that situation is that Doctor Who has never been particularly woke in the first place, for reasons I don't want to delve into here too deeply, but as one example, in a more recent episode, the Doctor helps Rosa Parks protest in the bus boycott, and it not only misrepresents what the actual history of the bus boycott was and how it unfolded at the time, it also takes a narrative about a black female protest and makes it about the Doctor, who is white, which is sort of also always how the situation goes, but in this case, a lot of the agency is taken away from a very brave woman who was part of an organized effort to achieve further civil rights for black people in America. And Doctor Who will be premiering its 12th season of its second series soon this year, showing no sign of slowing or stopping, and I really think that there isn't very much of an argument for it going broke. The bit about the black female snipers is funny to me because Delingpole phrases his comment as though he meets a lot of snipers and none of them happen to be black women. What's so far-fetched about the concept of black female soldiers? I mean, sure, black women are a minority in the population, but what, does that mean it's unbelievable now that they would exist? This is very tenuous reasoning, although I'm not sure what I expected from a man who opened his diatribe with typical "the jury is still out" style climate denial. My man has literally no idea what he's talking about. But as a funny note to leave him on, I think accusing the BBC of going broke in any respect for any reason is quite funny, seeing as the BBC is more likely to outlive him than the reverse.
But hang on there, some intrepid social justice activists might say. Black Panther was successful, Captain Marvel was successful, therefore diversity works. Crowds are hungry for more intersectionality. They crave more stories about genderqueer disabled sex workers. Well, in this video, we're going to talk about how, despite the fact that yes, Black Panther and Captain Marvel were successful, like every single Marvel movie is successful, things are not looking good for the future of woke propaganda from Hollywood.
I suppose we'd have to get around to this other kind of content at some point, but it's an inevitable irony of our political landscape that roaming millennial Lauren Chen, the platformer of Nazis and fascist talking points, would eventually appear here on Glenn Beck's The Blaze to tell us all about how minorities being in your movies is propaganda. The truth that I hope we can acknowledge moving forward, and hopefully this is informational if you're not familiar with Chen, is rather that Chen's career has moved towards the lucrative business of platforming conspiratorial right-wing views. If you're gearing up to make your next video about how Hollywood or some other small content creator is about to get woke and go broke, please consider that the bedfellows you're making are with Glenn Beck, the eminent far-right propagandist of our time. As an aside, I find it noteworthy that we all grow up in politicized environments where whatever we experienced in our developmental years inside our readily available social climate is already programmed into our brains as being normal. There are kids getting into college right now who were born into a post-9/11 America that signed onto one of the most disastrous cases of foreign intervention in American history, in large part because the brown Muslim population of one country served as well as any surrogate for the brown Muslim terrorists from other countries who attacked the World Trade Center. I feel compelled to leave this note here because that was Glenn Beck's America. It was the time when he thrived on mainstream cable news and shaped the minds of millions of Americans. Who we are, what we think, what we believe, is an indirect product of our interaction with an environment that to the youngest people in the audience will seem mostly normal, as if this was always the kind of rhetoric you could easily find in our media. It was not. So now on to Chen's examples.
First off, let's talk about Batwoman. The CW, which is already known for its woke LGBT inclusive series Supergirl, recently launched a newer, even woker, even LGBTer inclusive series called Batwoman. The series features a gay female lead Batwoman as the protagonist, which, by the way, does not in and of itself mean the series would be bad. But after the trailer was released, people weren't very confident that this would be a well-written series instead of just long-form progressive propaganda delivered in weekly installments.
You'll notice that most of what the folks featured in this video seem to imply, Chen readily says out loud. Instead of the most vague idea of being woke, which could favorably be interpreted sardonically as a more progressive than thou kind of sentiment, Chen simply calls it as she sees it, long-form progressive propaganda. Her stated reasoning for this? First, that the film features gay people and people of color prominently, and second, that the show might not be very good. We were going to get to this eventually, so let's take a look at yet another reason why Get Woke Go Broke is a dysfunctional non-critique of media. We've previously explored how some allegedly woke media is profitable while some is not, and why some more anti-woke or non-woke media is profitable while some is not. Imagine, if you will, if I were a more unhinged version of myself, and I wanted to say to you that every not woke work of art failed financially specifically because it wasn't woke. To be clear, I'm not talking about the idea that regressive media could be a financial failure. Rather, I'm trying to speak to the totalizing nature of this conversation. The phrase "Get woke, go broke" is stated in absolute terms, as if to imply that all woke media fails. It doesn't. Some of it does, but not all of it. So if we're talking about, say, a series status as being woke in addition to its financial success, I'd like to point out that these things have no evidenced causal connection. All we've heard so far in these videos alludes to the fact that fans of these people or their employers or friends might not like the woke material, but you have to ask yourself if this means the work won't be financially successful. I'm not just saying that some people will like the series and others won't, but also that not everybody agrees with or refuses to engage with work they disagree with or don't like. I watched all these videos, didn't I? And even if I'm a special case, I think metrics of success often are measured in relative terms. Chen mentions the Marvel films, but she also talks about the DC franchise without skipping a beat, which is weird because those are very different universes. The Marvel films are financial successes, but some are considered flops because they were less popular than others or because they were not well received critically. This reasoning is also often trotted out to call movies like Solo financial failures, when in the bigger picture it was anything but, despite, in my opinion, being a somewhat lackluster film. Supergirl was a relatively successful series, and Batwoman might be less successful, or it might be more successful than Supergirl, but less so than Marvel's Defenders series, despite the fact that, again, these are different cinematic universes. Are any of these things failures owed to woke attitudes because one made less money than the other? Hardly. Conservatives like Chen are infected with the same brainworm as the liberals they accuse of being incapable of interacting with people with whom they disagree. Right-wingers like Chen constantly have their blood boiling because they saw a black woman in a TV series. Their rationalization for their own distaste for these things is to remove themselves from the equations and make high-minded commentaries about what is realistic or financially lucrative. But the fact of the matter is, when you get down to it, they don't like seeing black people and women in things in those ways. Again, I'm strictly speaking of people like Chen, who can visibly barely contain her disdain for a series that cast a woman whose trailer she didn't like. I mentioned earlier that our environment normalizes certain ideas and ways of thinking, and I think this is also true of what we call echo chambers. In common parlance, your echo chamber is your circle of politically like-minded people which you rarely if ever leave. Just like many liberals are accused of this, many conservatives are also often refusing to leave their bubble, where they can then form strange ideas about how it's apparently normal to get mad at minorities in their movies, and when they get on other networks or channels that aren't in their echo chamber, they sound like lunatics. I'd encourage anyone, liberal, conservative, or otherwise, to break away from your affirming friends and spaces more so that you can be informed by society at large and a broader spectrum of what is considered normal. Even when you're right about things, this will balance how you understand the world. But Lauren Chen is a paid right-wing propagandist, so we're not going to expect this of her. And what about me? I've been sniping at others while interjecting with my own opinions, but after watching and reading the arguments, I have to say, I think I still believe my view that I had established some time before recording this video. Corporations are not your friends. They are not woke. They don't care about representation or mental health. They're profit machines, and they make a show of catering to minority groups because they believe they can form a coalition in their viewer base of fans who will consume their media for more than just liking it, for identifying with it. Again, corporations are not your friends. They aren't interested in social justice. They use identity politics as a smokescreen to obscure their own shittiness, which has been there even before white people started saying woke like it means something in corporate clown world. Nothing makes me want to vomit more than hearing a Disney executive talk about representation. Even in the past 20 years, Disney has been nailed for violating minimum wage laws, workplace safety laws, and even child labor laws. Chinese workers for Disney in 2005 got paid 40 cents an hour for mandatory 90-hour work weeks. Disney has, for decade after decade, been a union-busting corporate snake spitting venom in the eyes of average people like you and me. Again, corporations are not your friends. They don't care about your problems. You are grist for their machine. You are disposable to them. On that note, if you liked this video or disliked this video, click the little buttons that say so because the feedback really helps. If you have constructive criticism, or if you just think that I'm really pretty and you want me to know, then feel free to add anything in the comments section. Share with your friends and coworkers if you're enthusiastic about this content. I'd like to thank my patrons at patreon.com, a link to which is in the description. Our channel finally has merchandise in our storefront on Teespring, and you can check out my written work as well, all linked down below. If you'd like to support us via any of these avenues, I'd really appreciate it. I don't make hardly any work from this, and I would really like to be able to do more work like this, and justify more time and effort going into it. In a change of pace, this entire video was scripted, and I believe I might be sticking to a scripted format from here on out. That means fewer videos, but hopefully better and more coherent videos. I also have a Twitch channel where I stream games and chat about just about everything, and if you like, you can follow my second YouTube channel where abridged versions of my streams and other videos about games can be found. My name is Lauren of the Wife Material channel, and I'll be hoping to see you all on our next little adventure. Bye!